Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are joining us from today. It's 2:55, and we will start today's webinar in about 5 minutes. But before that, we have a short video, so may I ask the organizers to play the Urban Act video. Thank you.
Gazing upon our world from a distance, it appears peaceful and calm. But the reality is far different. The repercussions of climate change are approaching us all, and we all contribute to this impact. By 2050, projections indicate that over 3 billion people will reside in various urban centers in the Asia-Pacific region alone. Urban activities are a key contributor to climate change. Cities are responsible for 75% of global CO2 emissions, with transport and buildings among the most significant contributors. And since 2012, the Asia-Pacific region has collectively been responsible for more than half of global greenhouse gas emissions yearly. The repercussions of climate change are imminent and befalling us all. Several Asian countries are among the top 10 countries most affected by climate change, with the Philippines ranked the 4th, India ranked the 7th, and Thailand ranked the 9th. It's time to act, and we have a joint responsibility to address climate change through urban development planning and design guided by climate data. That's where Urban Act comes in. Urban Act, or the Integrated Urban Climate Action for Low Carbon and Resilient Cities project, is a regional project that aims to support the transformation towards low carbon and resilient urban development and contribute to implementing each partner country's nationally determined contributions and the Sustainable Development Goals. Funded by the International Climate Initiative, or ICI, commissioned by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, or BMWK, Urban Act is implemented in 5 partner countries: China, India, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand, with a duration spanning 5 years from 2022 to 2027. We aim to achieve 4 critical outputs. These outputs include improving the institutional environment for climate-sensitive urban development, using evidence-based, inclusive, climate-sensitive, spatial and urban planning, identifying project concepts for urban climate action investment, and enhancing knowledge through regional networking, exchange, and learning. Our collaborative partnership comprises the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit GmbH, or GIZ, as a project leader, and the international partners consisting of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, or ESCAP, United Cities and Local Governments Asia Pacific, or UCLG ASPAC, the University of Stuttgart, and TU Dortmund University, and national partners in each of the project countries. To promote and showcase a sustainable integration of climate change into urban development, Urban Act implements its support in 14 pilot cities across the 5 countries, recognizing the unique context of the partner countries and aiming to improve the country's specific policies and regulatory frameworks. Furthermore, we engage in joint operations with the Indonesia-Malaysia-Thailand Growth Triangle, or IMTGT, implementing initiatives in 6 cities within the IMTGT sub-region. We are all standing on the edge, and every decision and action we take today will shape our future for generations to come. It is not just a choice, it's a collective responsibility that falls on each of our shoulders. It's time for us to unite and journey towards low-carbon, resilient urban development. Join us in the Urban Act, Joint Action for Climate-Friendly and Resilient Cities. We are stronger if we are together.
Thank you. Thank you for that informative video. And a very warm welcome to all of our participants and speakers to the Climate Conscious Urban Act webinar series. Today's webinar is titled EPR Implementation for Plastic Waste Management in ASEAN. My name is Ryan Carvalho. I work for ESCAP in the Trade, Investment and Innovation Division. I'm the focal point for the work on the ESCAP Sustainable Business Network, and I'm pleased to be the moderator for today's webinar. I'm happy to inform you that we received around 500 registrations for today's webinar from Asia Pacific and beyond, which shows the keen interest in this topic. Today's webinar is part of a series of webinars under the broader Urban Act project, which you just saw profiled in the video a short while ago. Today's session is organized in collaboration with the European Union Philippines Green Economy Partnership, a 60 million euro flagship program of the European Union under its Global Gateway Initiative. The European strategy engaging with partners globally and promoting investments around shared priorities such as the transition to a green economy. The key objectives of the webinar series are to, first and foremost, increase the understanding and knowledge of participants to build integrated climate action for low carbon and resilient cities. Second, we want to communicate and raise awareness of key innovations and emerging topics for low carbon and resilient cities. We are also looking to build and enhance partnerships formed under the Urban Act project, together with other relevant organization, institutions, and experts. It is also important to showcase best practices, learnings, and innovations from the Urban Act project to a wider audience. Participants may have noted at the time of registration, there were questions about what you would like covered in today's webinar. I would like to thank all who responded. This helps the organizing team and the expert speakers to ensure that the content is as relevant as possible. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping announcements. So today's webinar is being recorded and will be available together with the slides for viewing. So if you have colleagues who want to watch it or you want to recap some of the key points covered today, you will be able to do that. And as you hear from our experts today over the next hour, please feel free to use the chat box to interact with other participants. However, for any questions that you may wish to direct to the panelists, please use the Q&A function, which is being monitored by the organizing team. Lastly, certificates of participation. Certificates are available should you need one, and these can be accessed by filling in the survey feedback form. My colleagues will put out a QR code at some point towards the end of the webinar with the survey feedback form. Please complete this form if you wish to receive a certificate of participation. With that, we can move on to today's topic. Today, we are diving into one of the most critical and dynamic environmental topics facing our region and other regions, plastic waste management. Across the Asia and the Pacific, rapid urbanization and soaring plastic waste are putting unprecedented pressure on our environment and our local governments. Traditional waste management models can no longer keep up, and countries across the ASEAN region are looking at extended producer responsibility, or EPR, to shift the burden by requiring producers, importers, and brand owners to take responsibility for plastic waste generated across their product's entire life cycle. From the legislation of the Philippines EPR Act to various regional pilots, member states in the ASEAN region are navigating different stages of this crucial circular economy transition. Today, we will hear from experts, and by sharing practical strategies, we aim to uncover how we can build sustainable and inclusive EPR systems that reduce plastic leakage and also ensure that no one is left behind. With that, I would like to invite our first speaker. We have Mr. Sachin Joshi, who will get things going. Sachin is a sustainability expert with 25 years of experience in policy and business advisory. He is a key expert at EU Switch Asia. He specializes in circular economy and ESG policy initiatives and EPR work. across Asia. The presentations today will be short to allow for more time for the Q&A segment, and Sachin will speak for only 8 minutes, but they will be 8 valuable minutes. So over to you, Sachin.
Thank you, Ryan, for that kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you also, ESCAP, for inviting the EU Switch Asia program to contribute to this important discussion. At the outset, I want to make a fundamental argument that EPR is not just a waste management tool, it's a cog in the circular economy wheel. And since we are talking in the context of the larger initiative on low carbon cities, climate friendly cities, this fundamental understanding is also very important because with the circular economic approach, where you try to keep materials more and more into the system as long as they can add value, you're also trying to decarbonize and contribute to the larger low carbon economy goals. So EPR has much bigger contributions to circular economy and low carbon goals than just looking at it from a narrow perspective of waste management. Now coming to some of the specifics of EPR, the obligations with financial implications that EPR places on producers should trigger fundamental changes in the product design. When producers are financially responsible for the end-of-life treatment of their products, they are incentivized to design products that are more durable, more repairable, and more cyclable. This is the shift from the linear take, make, dispose model to the circular economy, where materials are kept in use for as long as possible and where waste is designed out of the system from the very beginning. Before delving more into it, let me very quickly give you a context of and introduce to you the Switch Asia program. This is the largest and perhaps the oldest program funded by the EU in the entire region on sustainable consumption production. And over the years, it has also navigated more towards circular economy focus. And there are essentially two components. One's the one which is more popular is the grants component, where grant money goes directly into local initiatives, and the other is the policy support component, of which I'm a part of, and then where we work directly with the governments and other stakeholders in developing various policies related to circular economy and SCP. Specific to EPR, our work has been through technical advisories. We've been operating in the ASEAN region, but also other Asian sub-regions like South Asia and Central Asia. Last year, we produced assessment reports for 5 countries, of which Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand were from this part of the world. And then alongside that, we also produce some very short topical papers which address certain specific aspects of EPR, such as how do you prioritize waste streams and material streams, product design, what is the total cost of compliance of EPR, and similar topics that you see on the screen. Now, back to the EPR topic per se, we know that the landscape in ASEAN is the countries are at different maturity levels. There is definitely increasing momentum towards policy making on EPR. We have seen a number of voluntary initiatives dating all the way back to 2019, as a matter of fact. But in the recent years, there have been a lot of conversations and work going on to transit to mandatory systems. Just a few example, Vietnam has implemented a legal framework. Today, while we are focused on plastics, but their EPR mandate goes to other material streams also, such as electronic waste, tires, etc. Um, and since January 2024, when it was implemented, there have been certain progress, and but they are currently also in the process of review and amending certain aspects of their EPR legislations. In the Philippines, as Ryan also alluded to it, they started the EPR Act in 2022. It's focused on one material stream. It mandates companies to improve their recovery rate by 20% annually until 2028. So there's a graded approach, and also have a 80% recovery rate. Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, all of them have voluntary initiatives. They are all in the process of also transitioning to mandatory compliance, again with different time horizons for each of them. But yeah, I think by the turn of 2030, we hope to see that all of these have mandatory regimes. Again, here the material streams that they prioritize are going to vary depending upon the domestic requirements. And then at the same time, we have other countries such as Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, all also trying to see what they can do. In Laos, I'm aware that the government has asked one of the development partners to help them develop an EPR policy, and so the groundwork of consultations and all of that has already begun. Now, what does this landscape tell us? That ASEAN is moving towards EPR at very different speeds and very different approaches. This diversity is both a challenge and an opportunity, and one of them is the regulatory heterogeneity in EPR, as in other policy matters. Usually, I have found that this is construed as a criticism for ASEAN, but we will flip it around very quickly in a minute. For sake of comparison, let's look at the European Union. The EU is a formal union with binding legislation, yet it does not have a single template for EPR systems across its member states. Instead, EU member states implement EPR through varied national frameworks. For example, Belgium operates a highly integrated system with a nationally recognized blue bag that has achieved 73% recovery rate for household packaging. Germany manages competing for-profit PRO systems. It's very market-driven. And France has a single not-for-profit PRO. All the member states do agree to certain principles of EPR. They operate under a common legislative or EPR framework agreement, but then they have their own domestic laws, stipulations, that also is a characteristic of their domestic environments. And this is an important consideration, and a factor to keep in mind while developing EPR policies across the ASEAN region. Now, there are a couple of other developments in the EU. For example, the EU's packaging and packaging waste regulation. It sets minimum requirements such as eco-modulation, transparency, and producer involvement, but it leaves the detailed design again to the member states. So ASEAN is not a formal a union like the EU. It operates on principles of non-interference, consensus, and respect for national sovereignty. Expecting a single EPR template across ASEAN would be unrealistic and counterproductive.
Sachin,
What
may I
ASEAN
remind
can do,
you,
yeah.
may I remind you of the time if you can
Sure, sure.
Let me go through them.
How much
Thank you.
time is left?
You have exceeded the time, but perhaps you
Oh,
can
I'm
wrap up in
sorry.
another minute.
Sorry.
Thank you.
So let me then move to the governance and fund allocation. I think that might be relevant also with respect to some of the questions that we get. So in case of the governance, the EPR, there are implications when it comes to monitored fees, direct recycling. Many times EPR is driven primarily by cost minimization and waste management interest. It actually risks becoming a low cost compliance system rather than driver of circular economy transformation. What does this mean for ASEAN? Is that the the governments should ensure that the fees that are collected are transparent and it is available for as information to all the operators in the system. The governance is managed via inclusive multi-stakeholder PROs, and the EPR revenues are directly reinvested in sorting and modern recycling facilities. The success of EPR is going to depend less on who collects the money and more on how the money is governed and used. My apologies, I exceeded the time, but one usually gets carried over by the topic that they really like. But over to you, Ryan, and I can come back later with some questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sachin. Thank you for that landscape showing the maturity level of EPR policies in the region. And as you correctly pointed out, successful EPR programs can incentivize producers to design products that are able to be recycled, which can go a long way in tackling this problem. With that, I would like to move to our next speaker, Mr. Christophe Potra, who's an external consultant for EPR at GIZ. Christophe is also the CEO for Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and Asia at Landbell Group and brings over 20 years of global expertise in EPR. He has advised governments and international organizations on environmental compliance frameworks, and he also helped launch the European Recycling Platform in 2004. Over to you, Christophe.
Thank you very much, Ryan. So I will share my screen. Are you showing? Okay, you're showing the present. This fine. Then I will. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be here to present this topic and the work that we've conducted for the World Bank. So I've been involved in EPR advisory in multiple regions of the world and very much in Southeast Asia. I am currently engaged with GIZ in the Philippines and in Indonesia. But some years ago, we did a work on behalf of the World Bank, and this is what I'm going to talk about. So I will skip that slide. So basically, we have delivered a recommendation on EPR frameworks on operationalization in Africa, Middle East, Asia. But let's speak really on ASEAN. So the work that the World Bank commissioned, they did under the ProBlue project, and the ProBlue is a multi-donor trust fund, and the objective was to support policymakers in the ASEAN region with effective EPR implementation with a focus on plastic packaging. So we had 7 countries in scope. In ASEAN, out of the 10 that were members at the time, and the project was a 1-year project, roughly between 2023 and 2024. We delivered it with colleagues from Black Forest Solutions and local experts in the various ASEAN member states that we studied. So the work was consisting in stock taking regarding EPR development, which has been covered by the Sanshin in his presentation, so I won't necessarily spend much time there. So, okay, what was back then the situation? We compared with the development in other parts of the world, like in Africa, South America, South Asia. And then we identified what would be, in our experience, the critical factors for successful EPR implementation, which led us to develop the EPR ERAT, which means EPR Implementation Readiness Assessment Tool. And it's a tool, Excel-based, that is helping whoever is using it to assess the status and the readiness for EPR implementation in any country. So it has been developed for ASEAN, but you could use it arguably for any country. And so the presentation for dissemination was made in July 2024. So, and yes, the countries that we were studying at the time, so we had Vietnam, we had the Philippines, we had Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Malaysia. And so we developed an Excel sheet, an Excel tool, which has multiple tabs, which allow to address each of them various aspects to gauge EPR readiness. So there are basically three blocks. One is regulatory framework. What do we have to work with in terms of waste law, structuring law, local authorities law, EPR law, maybe already existing, laws, regulation on let's say various level under the legal hierarchy, waste management operation in terms of infrastructure and in terms of real practice, what is happening, and then other aspects focusing notably on the producers, because under EPR they are the ones who have the responsibility and who will finance the system, but also looking into other aspects. And so we created this tool, this questionnaire, by also leveraging the experience that we had and the observations that we made in other countries. And this work will be available soon, also under a new work that we're delivering at the moment, which is under the CMAP project. There will be the publication of an EPR handbook and customized toolkit toward later this year. And within the toolkit, the EPR assessment tool will be available. So, what we find in a nutshell, so regulatory framework, we look at status of EPR regulation. Do we have some? Are they complete or not? Whether you have issues maybe with other existing law, and what about the registration of producers or maybe waste operators? Looking into waste operation, so looking into collection, recycling, recovery, landfilling, and then the other aspect, looking at the producer market, where it's mostly driven by MNCs or local companies, or maybe a lot of informal producers. Then access to capital, pre-existing PR initiatives like voluntary, general awareness around EPR, and then availability of data to do the necessary assessment and calculation. So, which led us to classify the countries in terms of preparedness, or in terms of readiness. So, looking into regulatory framework, for instance, we at the time we noticed that Vietnam and the Philippines were advanced. In terms of waste management, we had Thailand and Malaysia, which we highlighted as advanced. And in terms of on the producer side, we saw Vietnam, meaning that the overall rating led us to position the Philippines and Vietnam as advanced compared to other countries, which would be at intermediate level or at initial level. And again, this was done in 2024, meaning that as of today, some countries may have evolved through the publication of roadmap or draft regulation. We could mention Indonesia, we could mention Malaysia, for instance. So I won't provide much detail here because it has been covered by Sanshin, but through the current CMAP project, we have updated the knowledge base for 10 out of the now 11 AMS, so ASEAN member states, and so who are at various level of regulatory implementation. And if we look now briefly around the similarity across the region, so we see that, first of all, when regulations start being developed, it goes rather quick. There tends to be a lot of flexibility, allowing producers to comply with different methods, like joining a PRO, joining individually, maybe paying to a fund, like in Vietnam. Some companies really set a threshold to waive the obligation of smaller companies, or MSMEs are not necessarily invited to participate into the system at the beginning. And we already see upstream expectations in terms of, for instance, design for recycling or use of minimum recycled content, etc., in various countries. And the country seems to be generally ready to understand that EPR regulation will have to be updated from time to time. If we continue, if we look at waste management operation, so there is a general lack of waste separation at source. There is the understanding from citizens that waste has value and therefore they should be paid for that, which may or may not be true all the time. That the recycling capacity is already existing for high value plastic like PET, but for the rest, it could be much more challenging. And we already have some high collection rates in various countries. We could also now mention the Philippines. And if you look at producer sites, so very often voluntary EPR is preceding the mandatory phase, and we saw that in several countries. And there is a problem with data availability, which is why the registry part is very important in our view. And then incentive may exist, but are not necessarily applied. So if we look in terms of good trends, or the positive trend, we see that voluntary EPR is a good precursor to mandatory EPR. It's not enough, but it's a good start. We have rather good definition of obligated companies, of producers. The product scope vary from country to country, but generally it is well formulated. The mandatory EPR carries in its body penalty in case of non-compliance. And there are at least foreseen the implementation of EPR registers. There is also work on recycling standard, etc. And some of the systems are also going into details regarding EPR covenants. However, if we look at the gaps, there are missing definitions. Sometimes there is a lack of targets, or the targets are not sufficiently well defined to make them really binding. There is sorry, there is something popping up on my screen. So sometimes the informal sector, we know, is very acting on
Christophe, if you can wrap up in 30 seconds. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm there. I'm done. And so informal, so waste actors can be not necessarily factored into the regulation, even though they are active on the ground. And the terms of regulations are not necessarily always used. And of course, because EPR is a new, still in the region, a new concept or the new practice, there is not yet necessarily high demand for recyclates, maybe with the exception of PET or HDPE. And there is an infrastructure gap when it comes to low value plastics. So I will stop here and hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Christophe. In the interest of time, I'd like to move to our next speaker, Ms. Athalie Reyes, who is the Senior Manager for EPR and Projects at PCX Solutions. Athalie leads their producer responsibility organization, which covers over 120 companies. Athalie is also a member of the Technical Working Committee for the upcoming Circular Economy Act of the Philippines. Over to you, Athalie.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone, and I'll move immediately to the next slide, please.
Okay.
So just a quick background on our organization. So at PCX Solutions, our core mission is simple. It's to accelerate the global transition to a circular economy where no plastic ends up in nature. So as a nonprofit organization, we act as a bridge between various stakeholders. We work side by side with governments to implement EPR schemes. We help corporations accurately measure their plastic footprints, develop actionable reduction strategies, and implement compliance with evolving legislation. So underpinning all of this is our plastic pollution reduction standard. It's a fully transparent third-party audited framework that ensures that every single plastic management project achieves verifiable and real-world impact. We also implement projects and grants. One of them is Plastic Reboot Philippines, which is a GEF-funded global project with the aim of finding circular solutions to plastic pollution, specifically in the food and beverage sector, focusing on upstream avoidance and reduction. So next slide, please. So before anything else, let's ground ourselves in the quick facts of the Philippine EPR landscape. I think some of this was already mentioned by the previous panelists, but I'll just give a summary. So the EPR mandate in the Philippines for now applies only to large enterprises as well as micro, small, medium enterprises with a combined asset value exceeding around 1.7 to 1.8 million US dollars, who generate, of course, post-consumer plastic packaging waste. The scope is limited to plastic packaging for now, and it's further classified into flexibles, rigid, plastic, bags, and polystyrenes. So to meet their targets, the law provides strategies that companies can undertake, categorized into upstream or those intending to reduce footprint, or downstream focusing on recovery and diversion of waste that has already been produced and introduced to the market. So next slide, please. So there are three major obligations under the EPR law. First, companies must register their EPR programs, focusing on either packaging reduction or structured recovery and diversion. Second, they must execute these recovery and diversion targets, which scale up aggressively over time. As you can see from our timeline, we started at the 20% target in 2023. In 2026, now we must recover and divert 60% of our footprint, moving toward an ultimate goal of 80% by 2028 and beyond. And lastly, companies are required to submit an EPR compliance audit report to officially submit their compliance to the law. We can go to the next slide, please. So these are the unofficial numbers for the second year of implementation, which was 2024. So this is the most recent data that we have. There's a total reported footprint of around 423 million kilograms of plastic packaging, and the recovery and diversion is around 238 million kilograms, giving us a combined diversion rate of around 56%. In 2024, the target was only actually 40%. So there is a bit of overcompliance, mostly driven by companies who chose to take responsibility for 100% of their plastic footprint. From an economic perspective, using a recovery cost of around 5,000 pesos per metric ton, the diverted waste injected an estimated 20.5 million US dollars of value into our economy. Next slide, please. So we undertook an examination of the current practices that obliged enterprises, PROs, waste management operators, and other stakeholders implement in line with EPR efforts. And we focused on just these three categories, which is data management, social inclusion, and upstream interventions. This comprehensive report was done under a grant from UN Peace and Development Trust Fund. So next slide, please. So we start with data management. The primary gaps that we currently face include the lack of centralized national standards for waste projects, a need for end-to-end traceability across the value chain, and stronger measures to protect data integrity. So to bridge these gaps, some of the already proven validation models are listed here. This means executing rigid third-party audits of the value chain, establishing strict safeguards against double counting. So by leveraging tools like public registry and blockchain technology, we can enhance auditability, eliminate fraud, and significantly increase public trust in the EPR. Next slide, please. So next is social inclusion. We all know that the core principle of any EPR system is to leave no one behind. So in the Philippines, and similar with other developing countries like Southeast Asian nations, the informal waste sector is really the backbone of our waste management system, yet we face massive challenges in incentivizing their inclusion and building sustainable structures for their cooperation and ensuring their basic health and safety protections. So there are already some initiatives addressing this at a small scale, but for true change to happen, these models have to be scaled and sustained. So there's already Adopt a Community program, community capacity, trash to cash goods programs. But again, these are very isolated cases for now. Next slide, please. Another model is the Allington-Dera Community Waste to Cash initiative, turning female micro-entrepreneurs into localized collection hubs. So some also focus on unlocking cooperatives' access to credit, social security, and government health insurance. We also highlighted in the report a model by the local government unit of Marilao, not because it's perfect, but because the intention is clear. So informal waste workers should not be displaced, and they should be recognized as a critical part of the ecosystem. So the LGU actually authorized a group of 30 informal waste workers to operate inside the municipal MRF. So the result is these workers now earn a steady 1,500 pesos per week, while the local government saves around 6 million pesos or around 104,000 $100,000 US in annual waste management cost. And next slide, please. Lastly, we look at upstream interventions. So right now, a major policy challenge is that our current EPR law lacks mandatory upstream targets or clear guidance on how source reduction directly impacts a company's footprint. However, some brands and companies aren't waiting for mandates, they're actively learning from their global commitments. So we're seeing a shift towards unnecessary primary and secondary plastic packaging, redesign, models like bring your own bottle, which focus on affordability, accessibility of refill models. Some take back models are also there. And some companies are already investing into bottle to bottle recycling facility and use recycled content for their packaging, even without the mandate. So next slide. In summary, to optimize the EPR in the Philippines, we recommend three areas of action. So first, on data, we must establish a robust national standard for plastic credits or waste diversion certificates backed by a public registry and standardized auditing. In terms of inclusion, we must remove systemic barriers to formality, foster interagency partnerships, and safely empower waste workers as entrepreneurs. And then third, on design, we need clear upstream guidelines, mandated recycled content, and strong incentives for refill and reuse models. So on this last point, we actually just held a workshop last June 11 to start working on the guidelines for the upstream considerations within the EPR. So the last slide, please. So the data presented here today proves that the transition is already beginning. So if we combine really policy with transparency and human dignity, we can, of course, be the generation that solves the plastic pollution crisis. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion in a bit.
Thank you, Natalie, for the very concise and detailed presentation and for adhering to the time limits. I think now would be a good time to move to the Q&A session. We are very interested to hear from our participants by the Q&A function. Looks like we already have a few questions. What I'm going to do is maybe I'll just read out a few questions and then we can see which of our speakers can take those questions. So we have our first question from Jonas Sagno. How can the ASEAN experience in extended producer responsibility for plastic waste management inspire African countries, particularly Guinea, in designing inclusive and practical EPR systems involving municipalities, SMEs, informal waste collectors, and the private sector? What are the key institutional, financial, and operational conditions that made EPR implementation effective in ASEAN cities, and which lessons could be adapted to emerging economies such as Guinea? Would any of our speakers like to take that one?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I can propose an answer. And you could say that EPR is composed of various building blocks, and which building blocks you're going to use and how you're going to shape them will depend from country to country. But the mechanism remains the same. That is making an initial assessment of what you are dealing with in the countries in terms of regulatory framework, private sector involvement, upstream with producers, downstream with waste management, role of the informal sector, availability of infrastructure, roles and responsibilities of local authorities. And based on that baseline assessment, on engaging with the regulator and with the local stakeholder, you can start defining what could be the direction your EPR is going to take. In that regard, the implementation readiness assessment tool could also be used in Africa. And I would also say that in Africa, there are a number of countries that have already taken steps toward implementing EPR. So in South Africa and in Kenya, for instance, you have enforced regulations. I mean, not necessarily final, but they are there, they are out there. And then countries like Ghana, like Nigeria or Côte d'Ivoire are also, as we speak, working on regulatory draft. And certainly Guinea can follow the same path.
Thank you. Thank you, Christophe. I think the IRAT tool, the readiness assessment tool, would be perfect for this particular case. So
Absolutely.
Moving on to the next question. It's from an anonymous attendee. What are the biggest challenges countries face when implementing EPR policies? Sachin, would you like to take that one, or Athalie?
Sure. So, the some of the biggest challenges, I think one of the things that I have found across the countries is that the regulators do not articulate the objective of having an EPR policy. Like it's very important to be very clear, why do we want an EPR policy? And this is important. Let me give an example. Let me give Europe's example. It's understandable that EPR came in when, waste, they were dealing with a waste crisis. And so the primary objective was waste management. But then no longer that objective holds true in today's situation. In 2026, when we are starting implementing EPR, waste management cannot be the singular objective. And then some of the EPR systems are designed where, for example, like in Philippines, which is focused a lot on recovery, whereas some others are focused a lot on recycling. What happens with recovery is that you can manage to get the material recovered, but then you don't know what to do with it. And so, it's very important to have these objectives clarified right at the beginning, because then from those objectives will follow exactly the design of the EPR system and the targets and the obligations that you set for the brands and the producers and the manufacturers and so on and so forth. Of course, there's a laundry list of challenges, but I'll stop at that one. Thank you.
Thank
If
you.
I may,
And
if I may
yes,
offer
Christoph.
also a comment on this and on taking really looking at a very high level, I think that there are two main challenges that are unfortunately quite prevalent in many early stage EPR. One is the regulation and the regulatory framework, which can be incomplete, which can have gaps, which can have improper formulation, leading to confusion or opportunity for not participating into the system. For instance, lack of targets, lack of defining well who should be paying or not paying, etc. So that is one aspect, that's design, if I may say, and the design bit, which can fail sometimes. And the other is the operationalization of EPR. And very often we see regulatory framework being defined, published, and then there is a big hiatus and nothing is happening on the ground because the operationalization process has not been defined, has not been managed. And I think that anybody designing EPR today should also think about the follow through for the operationalization. It's going to be different responsibility and different ownership, but the regulator would, I think, gain enforcement capability by having the handover to operation managed, prepared while the regulations are being developed.
Thank you. Thank you both, Sachin and Christoph. Our next question is from Nico Alino. How do we prevent plastic credits from simply becoming a corporate license to pollute? If collection-focused credits are significantly cheaper and less disruptive than restructuring supply chains for reusable or refillable models.
Yeah,
Perhaps Athalie would
I
like to
can.
come in? Yes,
Yeah, I
Athalie?
can take this. Yeah, so actually one of the highlights in our report and something that we do prioritize on a national level is really the establishing of the national standards for plastic credits or waste diversion credits. Because right now there's not really a standard where organizations can look at and issue plastic credits, right? So there is no control over what is a plastic credit, where does the funding go? And that's the most important part of plastic credits is it should fund the operations of continuing recovery and diversion projects. Now, plastic credits should not be seen as the only solution. It is part of a solution set. And as you mentioned, really, it's really also important to focus on the upstream interventions that companies can undertake because you also need to turn off the tap. So even if we have a perfect waste management system, as long as plastic is still leaking into the market, into the environment, nothing is going to change. And we all know that Philippines and most countries in Southeast Asia have limited infrastructure for waste management. So we really need to focus on upstream solutions. And I think that's one of the points that we are making and how the EPR in the Philippines is currently evolving. It's now looking at how do we incentivize within the EPR framework the upstream mechanisms for reducing the actual footprint. So this is a conversation that's already ongoing. So I think just to answer the question briefly on plastic credits, we need standards and we need transparency of where the funding is going to make sure that it's benefiting the value chain, it's benefiting the infrastructure that we have, and really moving towards the goals of EPR.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. Yes, I take your emphasis on the standards and the need for robust and transparent systems. Let's move on to the next question. It's from Edlin Lumanok. Any experience on implementing credits for plastic avoidance and refusal? Sorry. And not only recovery and diversion.
Yeah, I can also continue on that. I think it's a bit more complicated on plastic avoidance because you need to. So, for example, if you're instituting a refill system, right? So technically, you would think that there's plastic avoidance there, but you also need to see like the data. Is there actual reduction in the sales of those in sachet formats or in single-use plastic formats? Because you can just be creating another channel, but without actually reducing the single-use plastics to begin with. So it's a bit more complicated. And this is what I think we're trying to do in the Philippines with developing the guidelines for accounting methodologies for footprint reduction under upstream interventions. So it needs to be really carefully managed, I think, and not just assign avoidance credits immediately. So we need to see like what is the real impact of this, what are we trying to incentivize, and what is the measure of success that we can look at, and how do we monitor this implementation.
Many thanks, Natalie.
If I may complement just
Sure.
briefly to give you the example of India or other countries as well, where basically in the EPR policy, so you're going to consider that there are downstream measures that fall upon producers and upstream measures, and downstream measures can be fulfilled in a number of ways, including the generation of waste treatment certificates. In the case of upstream measures, such like use of recycled content, it is very often more strictly mentioned as a requirement in the regulation, and the producer must report separately on this, which is the case in India, where there are both collection targets, recycling targets, which are evidenced by the acquisition of certificates, and then the achievement of minimum recycled content or reuse, which has to be reported directly to the Central Pollution Control Board, but not via the production of certificates, simply through a reporting process, which still raises, of course, the necessity to evidence that the claim is effectively supported by standards and undocumented operation.
Many thanks, Natalie and Christoph. Our next question is from Shravasti Karmacharya. Her question is, while implementing the EPR policy, do you have any experience of reluctancy of multinational companies related to plastic waste management? If yes, please kindly share how was your strategy in the local context to effectiveness of the policy? Sachin or Christoph, would you like to comment on that one?
I can comment. Maybe Sachin will want to complement. So it happens indeed, not everywhere. not all the time, but in some countries, it can be perceived like, deletion tactics or some not outright opposition, never, but trying to defer the implementation or through lobbying and recommendation for certain course of action, and how it is overcome when that does happen is via stakeholder engagement. I think the regulator here has a strong role to play in order to define what is the ambition of the policy, the ambition of the government, and offering, of course, opportunity to address the hurdles, to overcome them one way or the other. But certainly the political will is a necessity.
Thank you, Christophe. Sachin, you want to compliment?
Well, I would say that, I wouldn't single out, one ownership like the multinationals. I think equally, the domestic companies could also try to lobby against the different aspects of regulations or its entirety. To the contrary, my experience has also been that the multinational corporations, because they want some kind of level playing field and uniformity across their geographies of operations, where in some countries there are obligations, in other countries there are still no obligations. They actually push for some of these upgrades and regulations and obligations so that they get various advantages in the supply chain. So I think the multinationals could be also used in a positive way of their own experiences of bringing in different experiences and things like that. The other thing we need to also remember is that it's also different types. The large multinational, which are very visible brands around the world, they also are in the spotlight for good and the not so good reasons. And so it is incumbent on them to, work alongside the regulators and help them develop some of these frameworks, which, as I said, also is part of their business interest.
If I may just piggyback on Sanchin's statement, which I totally subscribe to, indeed, what we see very often is that the MNCs, they come with experience in their group. Some of them may have undergone 20, 50 different EPR frameworks. So they have the experience or the ability to support and develop local knowledge. Whereas the local companies, whether large or smaller, at the beginning, they have limited understanding of EPR, and there is a need to develop that understanding and that knowledge. And so therefore, effectively, the multinational companies, sometimes through voluntary initiatives, can prepare for the implementation of EPR.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, both Christophe and Sachin. I agree. Multinational companies are indeed under tremendous pressure, and many a times they bring in expertise and build the capacities at the national level.
Yes, and another thing, if I may, is that very often I've heard multinational representatives saying, please regulate us. Because if it's not regulated, and then it's competition, and they have to compete with their competitors. So that please regulate us so that we have a level playing field and everybody needs to comply the same. And it's something to keep in mind when developing the regulation. And then with that in mind, you will get support from those companies.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question, perhaps Athalie can take this one. What is the best way to involve the informal workers sector in EPR implementation? Perhaps the speakers have experience for this issue.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways, and I don't think that we have found the perfect solution yet because it's not a perfect integration yet. I think for the Philippines and maybe in most similar countries, right, is the key really is the local government unit, because the local government unit, number one, has a mandate to establish the aggregating facilities, and they also have jurisdiction over the informal waste workers in their area. So how they can help to integrate the informal waste workers and to legitimize their livelihoods is really to enable the formation of cooperatives, so that they can really participate and they can have access to, social security, other benefits. And basically the local government unit should also provide safe working space for the informal waste workers where they can actually do their job, not being exhausted from weather conditions. And basically it's also the local government's unit job to connect that collection efforts, aggregating efforts to final processing to make sure that it doesn't go back into the environment. So I think the local government unit really has a key role to play here. And just on the EPR side of things, or the private sector side, I think what's also being asked for by the private sector stakeholders is, we know it's in the law to kind of form partnerships, or in the formation of partnerships with informal waste workers or communities are being encouraged, but it's not really incentivized in any way. So if EPR can somehow incentivize that, or make it more of a mandate or requirement, then that would really help that integration of the informal waste work community.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. Yes, I think, yes, Sachin?
May I contribute to this?
Sure. Yes, Sachin, go ahead.
Thank you. So, as Athalie mentioned, there are many examples around the world, and right from Brazil to parts of Africa, India, and even Taiwan, there are very interesting examples. One of the common ways is to organize the informal waste pickers into cooperatives, and then use these cooperatives also as business entities who are then able to do the formal sort of engagement, and in terms of legal terms, become part of the EPR regulatory regime. I think there is also, while we do all of this, and I think there are some questions also on the formality and the informality of the waste picking. I think formalizing the sector is one part, and inclusion of the workers is another part. I mean, of course, these are related issues, but please understand that, formalization does not mean inclusion. And I think the difficult challenge that everyone faces is the inclusion of the workers, their health and safety and minimum wages and social security and all sorts of issues. That comes with, having an inclusion approach. Formalizing the sector is easier done than the inclusion of the sector. So I think while crafting, and I would second what Athalie mentioned, is that some of these obligations on the private sector should be of including in the informal sector, should be part of the regulatory design, because if you leave it voluntary, then they're not necessarily going to be part of the supply chain. So that's the other part. What I also why I mentioned Taiwan is that they have, to my best understanding, they have actually set a base price on the material that the waste pickers actually get. And I think this is important. Many times what happens is that the wage rate is decided, but the base price of the material is not decided in favor of the waste pickers, and that's where they lose out. So these are some of the aspects worth considering when we deal with this very complex issue of inclusion and formalization of the informal sector.
Thank you. Thank you, Sachin. We have time, I guess, for one more question. So then The question is from Aurelio Salgados. The question is, here in the Philippines, the government is pushing for the establishment of waste to energy to reduce waste at landfills. Can the EPR and circular economy initiatives still be implemented since most political leaders are pushing for the establishment of waste to energy? What can you say about this challenging issue?
Well, I think being from the Philippines, I think the waste to energy bill is still currently in Congress or Senate or whatever, so it's not really a law. I know this is a priority because you also have the energy problem. Under EPR, there are allowed diversion methods that not necessarily is, I mean, it still follows the hierarchy of waste management, but it's allowed to send to landfills, to co-processing facilities or waste to energy facilities. So I think this is still plays into EPR. It's a different, I guess, debate on whether WTE is really a solution, but I think it doesn't really interfere with the implementation of EPR. In fact, we're still missing a key infrastructure to reach the 80% by 2028 without actual footprint reduction. That's why it's also really important to have the reduction piece because we don't have the infrastructure to reach the 80%. So while it's good to have additional infrastructure to manage the waste, we should also not lose sight that reduction really is important and we should also focus our efforts there.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie.
If I may just make one comment here, indeed, there could be some form of competition for the feedstock. And if, for instance, the amortization of the facility, incineration facility, is made assuming a certain volume and a certain quality of plastics, of course, it can create some frictions with the EPR system who needs to recycle plastic. So there should be some level of harmonization. As Ali is saying, is that indeed waste to energy is better than landfilling, but applying the waste hierarchy at the global scale should nevertheless be the priority and make sure that the sizing of the return on investment of any waste to energy facility is not threatening the implementation of recyclability or reuse initiatives.
Thank you. Thank you, Christophe. Regrettably, that is all the time we have for questions today. I apologize if we did not get to all your questions, but our panelists might still respond in writing to some of the questions that we not take up. I think all the speakers can see your questions and they might respond to some of them. A big thank you to our speakers for sharing their time and expertise, and to all of you in the audience for your sharp and engaging questions. As I had mentioned earlier, the presentations and materials from this webinar will be made available online post the event. I request all participants to kindly fill out the survey. I think a QR code will be available where you can access this survey, or via the link shared in the chat, which will also be made available by email post this event. Participants wanting to receive a certificate of participation showing they have attended this event are requested to answer the 3 questions on the content of this webinar at the end of the survey. You must fill out a survey to receive the certificate. Thank you once again all for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.